The security guard's hand, a slab of meat and polished knuckles, was the only thing between the little girl and the man in the glass elevator. It wasn't a threatening gesture, more one of weary bafflement. He knelt, bringing his formidable bulk down to her level, the fabric of his tailored trousers straining at the knees. "Miss, you can't be in here," he said, his voice a low rumble meant to be soothing, but only succeeding in sounding like distant thunder. "This is a private building." The girl didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed, laser-like on the descending elevator, a crystal cage lowering a king from his throne. Her chin was set with a resolve that seemed utterly out of place on a face so small, framed by a messy cascade of honey-blonde hair that had escaped its ponytail. She clutched the strap of a worn unicorn backpack as if it were a shield. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackwood," she announced, her voice piping but clear, cutting through the hushed reverence of the marble lobby. "It's important." The guard sighed, a sound of practiced patience. "Lots of people think their business with Mr. Blackwood is important. You need an appointment. Your mommy or daddy can call to make one." A flicker of something, pain, frustration, crossed her face. "My mommy's sick. And my daddy's not here." The elevator chimed its arrival, the soft, expensive sound echoing in the cavernous space. The glass doors slid open with a whisper. Alistair Blackwood stepped out, and the very atmosphere of the lobby seemed to chill. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, his suit a razor-sharp charcoal gray, his silver hair swept back from a face that held no warmth, only sharp angles and the piercing blue of his eyes. He didn't just walk. He consumed the space in front of him. His attention was on a tablet in his hand, his thumb scrolling dismissively. The guard, instantly on high alert, stood up, placing himself squarely in front of the child. "Mr. Blackwood, sir. My apologies. I was just handling this." Alistair didn't look up. "Handling it how, Gerald? By letting children wander into my lobby. This isn't a daycare." The girl saw her chance. She darted around the guard's legs like a minnow escaping a net and stopped directly in Alistair Blackwood's path. He finally looked up from his tablet, his stride halting abruptly. His eyes, the color of a frozen lake, dropped from the guard to the small, determined face staring up at him. For a moment, he was utterly still. He saw a smattering of freckles across a button nose, wide green eyes that held no fear, and a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in her lower lip that betrayed her bravado. "I need a job," the little girl said, her voice shaking only slightly. Alistair Blackwood stared, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Of all the things he had expected to deal with this morning, hostile takeovers, market fluctuations, stockholder revolts, a job application from someone who barely reached his waist was not one of them. The sheer absurdity of it was a physical blow. He blinked, a slow, deliberate motion as if trying to recalibrate his vision. "A what?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. The word was a splinter of ice. "A job," she repeated, louder this time, as if he were hard of hearing. "I can work very hard, I'm a good cleaner, and I can make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The secret is to put butter on the bread first, so the jelly doesn't make it soggy." Her expression was deadly serious, a candidate listing her qualifications with earnest pride. Gerald, the security guard, looked like he wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. "Sir, I am so sorry. I'll take her outside right now." Alistair raised a single, imperious finger, silencing him without a glance. His focus remained entirely on the child. The corners of his mouth, which seemed permanently etched into a downward curve, tightened. He looked past her, at the revolving glass doors, at the bustling city street outside, then back down at her. He saw the scuffed toes of her sneakers, a faded cartoon character peeking out from a tiny hole in the knee of her jeans. This wasn't a prank. This was desperation, dressed in a pink t-shirt. "Go home," he said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion. It was the same tone he used to dismiss a subordinate with a flawed proposal. He made to step around her. She mirrored his movement, blocking him again. "I can't," she said, a frantic edge now creeping into her voice. "I really, really need this job. It's for my mom." The mention of her mother struck a chord so deep within him, so long silent, that it was more of a dull phantom ache than a sound. He felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of irritation, hot and sharp. "Your mother's problems are not my concern," he snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. "The world is full of problems. I am not here to solve them. Gerald, get her out of my building. Now." He turned on his heel, his long strides carrying him toward the sleek black town car that was already purring at the curb. He didn't look back. He never looked back. But as he slid into the cool leather interior, the scent of which was meant to soothe him, he could still see the reflection in the polished window. A very small girl, with a very large unicorn backpack, standing defeated in the vast empty lobby. A lone, colorful weed that had dared to sprout through concrete. And for the first time in over a decade, Alistair Blackwood felt a crack in the ice. The drive to the office was a blur of steel and glass, the city a muted backdrop to the turmoil in his mind. He ran Blackwood Industries, a global conglomerate with interests in everything from tech to real estate, with the precision and emotional detachment of a surgeon. His days were partitioned into 5-minute increments, each one accounted for, each one dedicated to the relentless pursuit of growth and profit. There was no room for anomalies, for stray variables, for little girls with soggy bread prevention strategies. Yet she was there. A persistent afterimage burned onto his retinas. He saw her earnest, freckled face in the quarterly reports on his tablet, heard her clear, high voice over the drone of his chief financial officer on the conference call. He was famously unflappable, a man whose resting heart rate barely climbed during the most volatile market crashes. Today, he felt a strange, unfamiliar agitation, a buzzing under his skin. He found himself pacing the length of his penthouse office, a sterile expanse of chrome and black leather, with a panoramic view of a city he owned but never truly saw. Why had she gotten to him? He'd had people beg before. Grown men with ruined businesses had wept in the very chair he was now staring at. Ambitious young women had pleaded for opportunities. He had dismissed them all with the same cool indifference. But this was different. It was the solemnity in her eyes, the gravity with which she spoke of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was the mention of her sick mother. That was the key, wasn't it? The word mother had always been a locked door in his mind, and this child had just walked up and picked the lock with a hairpin. He strode to the wet bar, a sleek marble slab in the corner of his office, and poured a glass of water, his hand not quite steady. He didn't drink alcohol during the day. It dulled the edges he worked so hard to keep sharp. He looked at his reflection in the tinted window. The man staring back was a stranger in a ridiculously expensive suit, his face a mask of controlled power, but behind the eyes, a ghost stirred. The ghost of a man who once had a daughter with honey blonde hair and a penchant for asking impossible questions, a daughter who had loved unicorns. He slammed the glass down, the water sloshing over the rim. This was preposterous. He was letting sentimentality, a fatal flaw in his line of work, cloud his judgment. The girl was a minor inconvenience, a momentary disruption. She would be gone, forgotten by lunchtime. He would will it to be so. He buzzed his assistant. "Eleanor," he said, his voice clipped. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was, as always, a model of calm efficiency. "The incident in the lobby this morning, has it been dealt with?" There was a brief pause. Gerald escorted the little girl outside, sir. She didn't want to leave. She's sitting on the steps by the fountain. Alistair's jaw clenched. Why? She said she's waiting for you to finish your work, so you can interview her. He squeezed his eyes shut. The sheer, unmitigated stubbornness of it was almost impressive. It was also infuriating. He was Alistair Blackwood. People didn't wait for him. He made them wait. Call social services, he commanded. Have them deal with it. She's probably a truant. Right away, sir. He hung up, the feeling of agitation returning tenfold. That was the right move. The logical, efficient move. Let the proper authorities handle it. It was no longer his problem. He sat at his desk, a vast expanse of polished obsidian, and pulled up the schematics for a new skyscraper project in Dubai. He stared at the elegant lines, the soaring ambition of the design, but his mind wasn't there. It was on the steps outside, with a stubborn little girl and her unicorn backpack. He imagined the social services car pulling up, the tired-looking caseworker, the girl's frightened face as she was led away. Where would she go? What was the story with her mother? The questions were like wasps, buzzing angrily in the quiet of his office. He cursed under his breath, a sharp, violent sound. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked down. 40 stories below, a tiny figure in a pink shirt was a speck of color against the gray granite of the plaza. He couldn't make out her features, but he didn't need to. He knew she was there, waiting. An hour passed, then 2. He held 3 conference calls, negotiated the terms of a hostile merger, and dictated 17 emails. Through it all, a part of his consciousness was fixed on that spot below. He found himself glancing down between tasks, a compulsive tic he couldn't control. She hadn't moved. She just sat there, small and still, a silent, unyielding protest. Eleanor's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, the representative from Child Services is on line 1. They're having trouble locating a guardian for the child. Her name is Lily. She won't give them a last name or an address. She just keeps saying she has a job interview with you." Alistair stared out the window. The late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the plaza, and the small figure was now partially obscured. He thought of his own daughter, Sophie. She had been that determined, that single-minded when she wanted something, whether it was a new pony or 5 more minutes before bedtime. He had admired that fire in her, even when it exasperated him. It was a Blackwood trait, he'd told himself. He had spent the last 10 years trying to extinguish every flicker of that fire within himself, burying it under layers of ice and routine. Now, here was this little girl, this stranger, holding a mirror up to a part of him he thought was long dead. He felt a sudden, suffocating pressure in his chest. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, "cancel my 4 o'clock. And tell the person on line 1 to stand down. Sir, and Eleanor, tell Gerald to bring the girl up to my office." The elevator ride up was a silent, tense affair. Lily stood in the corner of the glass box, her eyes wide as she watched the city shrink beneath her. She wasn't looking at Alistair, but she was intensely aware of him, of the vast, silent space he occupied beside her. He smelled like clean laundry and something sharp, like lemons. He hadn't said a word to her since Gerald had gently retrieved her from the steps, his expression a mixture of relief and utter confusion. Alistair, for his part, felt like he was handling a live grenade. What was he doing? What was he going to say? He had no frame of reference for this. Children were an alien species he hadn't interacted with in a decade. They were loud, messy, illogical. They disrupted order. When the doors whispered open to his office, Lily's gasp was audible. She craned her neck, her gaze sweeping over the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling cityscape laid out like a map at her feet. "Wow," she breathed. "You're really high up." Alistair walked to his desk and gestured vaguely at one of the severe black leather chairs opposite him. It was a chair designed to intimidate, to make powerful men feel small. Lily scrambled onto it, her legs dangling a good foot from the floor. She placed her unicorn backpack carefully on her lap. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Alistair sat down, the familiar creak of his own chair a small comfort. He steepled his fingers, a default gesture when he was negotiating. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice formal. "Lily." "Lily what?" She looked down at her backpack, tracing the outline of the unicorn's horn with her finger. "My mom says not to give our last name to strangers." Alistair felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. "I see. A very sensible policy. However, as you are in my office applying for a job, I believe I have graduated from stranger status." Lily considered this for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Okay," she conceded. "It's Carter." "Lily Carter." "All right, Miss Carter." He leaned back in his chair. "You mentioned you need a job. What for?" "It's for the medicine," she said simply. "And for the rent. And for food that's not just toast. The medicine is the most important part, though. It's very expensive." "Your mother is sick," he stated, the words feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "What is wrong with her?" "She has lupus," Lily said, pronouncing the word carefully. "It makes her really, really tired. Sometimes her joints hurt so much she can't open a jar of pickles. And she gets this rash on her face that looks like a butterfly. She says it's her butterfly kisses from the inside." The description was so childlike, so poignant, it caught him off guard. He had been expecting a simple answer, a diagnosis he could process like a data point. Instead, he got butterfly kisses. "And your father?" he asked, steering the conversation back to safer, more factual ground. Lily's face clouded over. "He left," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A long time ago. He said my mom's sickness was too expensive. He said he wasn't built for it." The bald, unvarnished truth of it hung in the air between them. Alistair felt a flicker of contempt for this man he'd never met, this man who had walked away. It was a feeling he recognized, the disgust he felt for weakness, for failure. He had built his empire on the failures of weaker men. "So you decided to get a job," he said, trying to piece together her logic. "Someone has to," she said with a shrug, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Mom tries to work. She designs websites from her bed, but she gets tired so fast, and sometimes her fingers hurt too much to type. I help her. I make her tea and bring her the laptop. But it's not enough." She looked him straight in the eye, her green gaze unwavering. "I saw you on the news once. They called you a tycoon. The lady on the news said you could buy anything you wanted, so I figured you could afford to hire me." The flawless, brutal logic of a child. It was both maddening and, in a strange way, irrefutable. He was a tycoon. He could afford to hire her. The absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. Here he was, a man who moved markets with a single word, being lectured on economics by an 8-year-old. "And what skills, besides the soggy bread prevention technique, do you bring to this organization, Miss Carter?" he asked, a hint of dry sarcasm creeping into his tone. He couldn't help it. It was his native language. Lily, however, took the question with utmost seriousness. She sat up straighter, a tiny professional in a high-stakes interview. "I can dust," she began, ticking the points off on her fingers. "But not the high shelves. I'm a very good organizer. My mom says I have a knack for putting things in their proper places. I can water plants. I'm good at listening. And—" She paused, her expression turning thoughtful. "And I can tell when people are sad, even when they pretend they're not." Her eyes stayed on his, and for a terrifying second, Alistair felt seen. truly seen, in a way he hadn't been in years. It was as if she had peeled back the layers of Armani wool and corporate steel and looked directly at the hollow space inside him. The air crackled. He looked away first, his gaze falling on a framed photograph on the corner of his desk. It was the only personal item in the entire office, a concession to a past he couldn't entirely erase. It was a picture of his wife Lara and his daughter, Sophie, taken on a sailboat. They were laughing, their hair whipped back by the wind, the sun illuminating them in a golden halo of happiness. Sophie was about Lily's age in the photo. He felt the old, familiar grief clawing at his throat, cold and sharp. He had built this fortress of an office, this empire of numbers and deals, to keep that feeling at bay. And now, this little girl had walked in and laid siege to it all. He had to get her out of here. He couldn't handle this. Not now, not ever. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," he said, his voice regaining its customary frost. "There are no positions available for someone with your, qualifications. Child labor laws, you understand. It was interesting to meet you. Gerald will show you out." He stood up, a clear dismissal. He expected tears or perhaps another argument. He was prepared for either. What he was not prepared for was the look on her face. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was a profound, soul-deep weariness, the look of an old woman who had just received one final piece of bad news. The fire in her eyes flickered and died, leaving behind only ashes. "Oh," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She slid off the enormous chair, her small form looking utterly lost in the vast office. She picked up her backpack and turned to leave, her shoulders slumped in defeat. And then at the door, she stopped. She turned back, and there were tears shimmering in her eyes now, but she fought them back with a ferocity that was heartbreaking to witness. "It's not fair," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have all this money, all these big windows, and my mom can't even afford the one medicine that helps her get out of bed. You have so much, and we have nothing. And all I did was ask for a job." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked out, leaving Alistair Blackwood standing alone in the deafening silence of his perfectly ordered, perfectly empty world. Her words echoed in the space she had left behind, chipping away at the foundation of everything he had built. "You have so much, and we have nothing." It was the raw, unfiltered truth, and it was a truth he could no longer ignore. He sank back into his chair, the carefully constructed edifice of his life crumbling around him. For the first time, he didn't see the city through his window. He saw a little girl with a unicorn backpack, a sick mother with butterfly kisses on her face, and the vast, yawning chasm that separated his world from theirs. The rest of the day was a write-off. Alistair canceled his remaining meetings, citing a sudden migraine, a lie that felt uncomfortably close to the truth. The pressure behind his eyes was immense, a physical manifestation of the war raging in his mind. He couldn't get Lily's final, damning words out of his head. They were an accusation, a judgment, and he had no defense. He who could dismantle any legal or financial argument with ruthless precision was left speechless by the simple, emotional logic of a child. He had spent his life accumulating power, wealth, assets. He thought of them as a shield, a bulwark against the chaos and pain of the world. But Lily had shown him it wasn't a shield. It was a cage. A gilded panoramic cage of his own making. In the evening, he didn't go to the exclusive restaurant where he had a permanent reservation. He didn't attend the charity gala for which he had written a 7-figure check, a transaction handled by his finance department, requiring no emotional investment whatsoever. Instead, he went home. Home was a sterile, multi-level penthouse apartment that had been featured in architectural magazines. It was a monument to minimalist design and emotional emptiness. It was less a home than a gallery, and he was the sole, lonely exhibit. He walked through the silent rooms, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. In the kitchen, a private chef had left a perfectly prepared meal of seared scallops and asparagus foam, which he ignored. In the living room, a state-of-the-art media system sat dormant. He found himself standing before a door he hadn't opened in 10 years. It was an ordinary door, painted the same shade of gallery white as all the others. But to him, it was the most terrifying door in the world. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. It was locked. Of course it was locked. He had given the key to his housekeeper years ago with strict instructions to never, ever open it. He had wanted the room preserved, a perfect, untouched mausoleum. Now he needed to get in. He went to his study, a room dominated by a desk that looked like a weapon, and retrieved a small silver key from the back of a locked drawer. His heart hammered against his ribs as he returned to the door. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. He pushed the door open. The air that greeted him was stale, thick with the scent of dust and faded potpourri. It was Sophie's room. Everything was exactly as she had left it on that last terrible morning. A stuffed unicorn, so similar to the one on Lily's backpack it made his breath catch, sat propped against a stack of pillows on her bed. A half-finished drawing was on her small desk, colored pencils scattered around it. A mobile of glittering stars and planets hung from the ceiling, perfectly still. He stepped inside, feeling like an intruder in his own past. He ran a hand over the wooden headboard, over the soft, fuzzy fabric of the unicorn's mane. He picked up a book from her nightstand, The Little Prince. A passage was underlined in pencil. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. He had read that line to her 100 times, his voice a low rumble as she drifted off to sleep. He had thought he understood it then. He had been a different man then. A man who laughed, who loved, who saw with his heart. That man had died in the twisted wreckage of a car on a rain-slicked highway alongside his wife and daughter. The man who had survived was a hollow shell, a ghost who had learned to see only with his eyes, to measure the world in numbers and stock prices. He sat on the edge of the small bed, the springs groaning in protest after a decade of silence. He was surrounded by the evidence of a life filled with love and joy, and the emptiness inside him became a physical, crushing weight. Lily Carter had not just asked for a job. She had, in her own guileless way, asked him if he was still human. And for the first time, he wasn't sure of the answer. He stayed in that room for hours as the city lights began to sparkle outside the window. He didn't cry. He was long past tears. He just sat. And he remembered. He remembered Sophie's laugh, Lara's smile, the feeling of their small, happy family. And he remembered the all-consuming guilt that had been his constant companion ever since he lost them. He had been driving. He had been distracted, arguing with Lara about some trivial business deal he couldn't even recall now. He had looked away from the road for just a second. A second was all it took. That guilt had been the fuel for his relentless ambition. He had built Blackwood Industries as a penance, a distraction, a way to prove to a dead wife and daughter that he was not a failure in all things. But it was a hollow victory. He was rich, powerful, and utterly, profoundly alone. Lily's words came back to him. You have so much, and we have nothing. She was wrong. She had a mother she loved, a mother she was willing to fight for. She had a purpose. In that moment, sitting in his daughter's dusty, silent room, Alistair Blackwood knew that Lily Carter was richer than he could ever hope to be. A decision began to form in the ruins of his heart. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It made no business sense whatsoever. but it was the first thing he had felt in 10 years that wasn't born of guilt or grief. It felt right. He finally stood up, his joints stiff. He walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind him. He went to his study, sat at his cold, imposing desk, and picked up the phone. He didn't call his security chief or his legal team. He called Eleanor, his unflappable assistant, waking her from a sound sleep. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raw, "I need you to find someone for me. A little girl named Lily Carter. Her mother has lupus. That's all I have. I don't care what it takes. I don't care what it costs. Find her." Finding Lily Carter proved to be more difficult than Alastair had anticipated. His private investigation team, a group of ruthless former intelligence agents who could normally locate a person with nothing more than a grainy photograph, hit a brick wall. There were thousands of Carters in the city. Without a last known address, a school, or a social security number for the mother, they were adrift in a sea of anonymous data. For 3 days, Alastair was consumed by the search. He was distracted at work, his legendary focus shattered. He snapped at his board of directors and walked out of meetings, much to the alarm of his executive team. His world had been reduced to a single, obsessive goal: finding the girl. He kept seeing her face, her slumped shoulders as she walked out of his office. He had done that. He had snuffed out her hope. The thought was a constant, sharp pain in his chest. On the 4th day, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Gerald, the security guard from the lobby, approached him hesitantly as he was leaving for the day. "Mr. Blackwood, sir," he began, twisting his cap in his hands. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I heard you were looking for the little girl." Alistair stopped, giving the guard his full attention. "You know where she is?" "Not exactly, sir, but, well, I felt bad for her after you left, so I bought her a hot dog from the cart on the corner. We got to talking. She mentioned her mom likes the fountain at Willow Creek Park. She said it has statues of angels, and her mom says they're watching over them." Willow Creek Park. It was in one of the city's older, less affluent neighborhoods, a world away from the gleaming steel and glass of his downtown empire. It was a lead, the first real one he'd had. He looked at Gerald, truly looked at him, for the first time. He saw a kind, decent man, someone who had shown a simple act of compassion where he himself had shown none. "Thank you, Gerald," Alistair said, his voice quiet. "You've been more helpful than a team of men I pay a fortune." He handed the guard a folded $100 bill. "For the hot dog." Before Gerald could protest, Alistair was in his car, giving his driver the new destination. He told him to wait at the entrance. This was something he had to do alone. The park was a swatch of green tucked between tired-looking brick apartment buildings. It was late afternoon, and the playground was filled with the shrieks and laughter of children. Mothers sat on benches, their faces weary but watchful. It was a scene of ordinary life, something Alastair hadn't been a part of in years. He felt conspicuous in his tailored suit, an alien creature in this foreign habitat. He walked along a cracked pavement path until he heard the sound of splashing water. In the center of a circular plaza stood a large, ornate fountain, its water green with age. The angel statues were streaked with grime, their stone faces weathered and serene. And there, sitting on the edge of the fountain, was Lily. She was tossing breadcrumbs from a small paper bag into the water, watching a flock of pigeons peck at them greedily. Beside her, huddled in a thin coat despite the mild weather, sat a woman. She was pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes, but she had the same honey-blonde hair as her daughter, and the same determined set to her jaw. As she turned to say something to Lily, Alastair saw the faint, butterfly-shaped rash across her cheeks and the bridge of her nose. It was Sarah Carter, He approached slowly, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the worn stone. Lily saw him first. Her eyes widened in shock, and she dropped the bag of breadcrumbs. The pigeons scattered in a flurry of wings. "Mr. Blackwood?" she whispered, as if he were an apparition. Sarah turned, her expression wary, protective. She put an arm around Lily's shoulders, pulling her close. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Alistair stopped a few feet away, feeling an uncharacteristic nervousness. He had faced down corporate raiders and hostile governments without flinching. Why did this frail-looking woman and her small daughter intimidate him so much? "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice sounding stiff and formal to his own ears. "My name is Alistair Blackwood. Your daughter paid me a visit a few days ago." Sarah's expression tightened. "I know. She told me. I am so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. She shouldn't have bothered you. She just gets these ideas in her head." "She's very determined," Alistair said, looking at Lily, who was peering at him from behind her mother's arm. "She applied for a job." A faint, sad smile touched Sarah's lips. "She's been applying everywhere. The library, the corner grocery store. She thinks she needs to be the one to fix things." "I was unprofessional," Alistair said, the admission costing him a great deal. "I dismissed her out of hand. I was wrong to do so. The truth is, I do have a job opening, and I think she's the perfect candidate for it." Lily peeked out further, her eyes shining with a fragile, dawning hope. Sarah's gaze remained suspicious. "A job? For an 8-year-old? What kind of job?" This was it, the moment of truth. He had rehearsed this, but the words still felt clumsy, inadequate. "I have a garden," he said. "A rooftop garden at my home. It belonged to my wife. She passed away some time ago. I haven't touched it since. The plants are all dead. It's a mess. I need someone to bring it back to life. Someone who can water plants and put things in their proper places. The pay is generous." He looked directly at Sarah, his gaze unflinching. "And it comes with a comprehensive health insurance plan that starts immediately." Sarah stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. She searched his face for a sign that this was a joke, a cruel prank. But she found none. She saw only a deep, profound sadness in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for us?" Alistair's gaze drifted to the angel statues, their stone faces impassive. He thought of Sophie's room, of the underlined passage in the book. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly." "Because your daughter reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said softly. "That some things are more important than balance sheets. And because no child should have to worry about their mother's medicine." He looked back at Lily. Her face was alight with a joy so pure and radiant it was almost painful to behold. She wriggled out of her mother's grasp and ran to him, stopping just short of hugging his legs. "Really?" she breathed. "A real job? For me?" Alistair felt the corners of his mouth, long dormant, twitch upward in something that felt almost like a smile. He knelt down, just as Gerald had done in the lobby, bringing himself to her level. "A very real, very important job, Miss Carter," he said, his voice husky. "When can you start?" The rooftop garden was worse than Alistair had described. It was a graveyard of good intentions. Brittle brown stalks stood in expensive terracotta pots. Weeds choked what had once been flower beds. A layer of city grime covered everything, from the wrought iron benches to the small, cherubic fountain in the center, now silent and dry. It was a place of profound neglect, a perfect reflection of his own heart. The first day Lily arrived, chauffeured in one of Alistair's town cars. a detail that had left Sarah both bewildered and grateful. She surveyed the scene with a serious expression. She wore a new pair of bright yellow gardening gloves that were comically large on her small hands. "Okay," she said, putting her gloved hands on her hips and striking a business-like pose. "This is a big job. A very big job. First, we need to do a cleanup." Alistair, who had intended to simply show her the garden and then retreat to his study, found himself being drafted as her assistant. "Mr. Blackwood, can you please carry this pot? It's too heavy for me." "Mr. Blackwood, we need more trash bags. The big ones." He found himself complying without argument. He who commanded an army of thousands was taking orders from a pint-sized foreman in yellow gloves. There was something so surreal about it, he could only submit. He hauled dead plants and pulled up stubborn weeds, the unaccustomed physical labor making his muscles ache. He got dirt on his expensive trousers and under his manicured fingernails. And for the first time in a long, long time, he felt alive. Lily was a whirlwind of focused energy. She chattered constantly as they worked, telling him about her school, her favorite television shows, and the intricate social politics of the second-grade playground. She asked him questions, endless, probing questions that no one had dared to ask him in years. "Why are you so sad all the time?" she asked as they were trying to untangle a dead vine from a trellis. Alistair froze, a brittle brown stem crumbling in his hand. "I'm not sad," he said, his voice stiff. "I'm serious." "No," she said, shaking her head with the certainty of a sage. "You're sad. Your eyes look like a rainy day. My mom gets that look sometimes. That's when I know she needs extra hugs." He didn't know how to respond to that. He had no protocol for extra hugs. He simply went back to pulling at the vine, his silence a heavy cloak. Their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Every day after school, Lily would arrive and they would work in the garden for 2 hours. Alistair, to his own astonishment, began to reschedule his afternoon meetings to accommodate what he now referred to in his own mind as the garden project. He told Eleanor it was a high-priority urban renewal initiative. She, wisely, did not ask for further details. He learned that Lily was whip-smart, with a surprising knowledge of plants gleaned from library books. He learned that her favorite color was yellow, like her gloves, because it was the color of happiness. He learned that she missed her father, not because he had been a particularly good father, but simply because he was gone. In turn, Lily began to learn about him. She learned that he liked his coffee black and his silences long. She learned that he didn't know how to smile properly. It was a rusty, unused muscle. And one afternoon, she learned about Sophie. They had cleared a particularly stubborn patch of weeds to reveal a small, heart-shaped paving stone with a name etched into it. Sophie's Sunflower Patch. Lily traced the letters with her finger. "Who's Sophie?" she asked quietly. Alistair felt the air leave his lungs. He sat down heavily on one of the wrought iron benches. He hadn't said his daughter's name out loud in years. It felt like breaking a sacred, painful vow. "She was my daughter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This was her garden, her and her mother's." "Is she gone?" Lily asked, her voice full of a child's simple, direct empathy. Alistair could only nod, the lump in his throat too large for words. Lily came and sat beside him on the bench. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," or any of the other useless platitudes adults offered. She simply sat, her small shoulder almost, but not quite touching his. After a long silence, she said, "My mom says that when people we love die, they become stars, so they can still watch over us. Do you think Sophie is a star?" Alistair looked up at the pale afternoon sky. He had never been a man for whimsy or faith. He was a man of facts and figures. But as he looked at the earnest, hopeful face of the little girl beside him, he found himself wanting to believe it. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "I think she is the brightest one." From that day on, something shifted between them. The garden project became more than just a job. It became a mission. Lily was determined to make it beautiful again, for Sophie. "We have to plant sunflowers," she declared. "Right here. It says so." Alistair found himself at a nursery, a place he hadn't set foot in since he and Lara had picked out rose bushes for this very garden. He felt like a ghost, walking through aisles of vibrant, living things. He bought bags of soil, fertilizer, and a packet of sunflower seeds. Under Lily's careful supervision, they prepared the soil and planted the seeds in Sophie's patch. As Lily patted the last bit of dirt into place, she looked up at him. "Do you think she'll see them? From up in the sky?" "I think," Alistair said, a genuine, albeit small smile gracing his lips, "that she won't be able to miss them." Meanwhile, he had made good on his other promise. Sarah Carter was now under the care of one of the top rheumatologists in the country. The new medication, which would have been ruinously expensive without his insurance, was already making a difference. The exhaustion was less profound, the pain in her joints more manageable. There was a flicker of color back in her cheeks. She was wary of Alistair, of his sudden, overwhelming generosity. She couldn't understand his motives, but she couldn't deny the change in her daughter. Lily was brighter, happier than she had been in years. She was full of stories about Mr. B in the garden. She was a child again, not a tiny, worried adult. For that, Sarah was endlessly grateful. Alistair started having his driver bring them both to the penthouse. While Lily worked in the garden, Sarah would sit in the comfortable, sunlit kitchen, a cup of herbal tea in her hands. She and Alistair began to talk. Tentatively at first, their conversations were stilted, careful. He asked about her web design work. She asked about his company. But gradually, the walls began to come down. She told him about her struggles with her illness, the fear, the frustration, the daily battle. He, in turn, found himself speaking of Lara and Sophie, of the life he had lost. He told her about the accident, the guilt he carried. He told her things he had never spoken of to another living soul. He found in Sarah a quiet, compassionate listener. She didn't offer pity or judgment. She simply understood loss. They were two lonely, wounded people from vastly different worlds, finding a strange, unexpected comfort in each other's company. The garden began to transform. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the dark soil. Alistair installed a new pump for the cherub fountain, and the sound of trickling water returned to the rooftop. Lily, with an artist's eye, directed the placement of new flowering plants Alistair had bought. Yellow marigolds, purple petunias, white alyssum. Color and life were returning to the neglected space, and not just to the garden. Color was returning to Alistair's life. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. He noticed the changing seasons, the taste of his food. One evening, as he and Lily were finishing their work, she pointed at his face. "You're doing it," she exclaimed. "Doing what?" "Smiling, a real one." He touched his face, surprised. He hadn't even realized. The change in Alistair Blackwood did not go unnoticed at his company. The man who was once a creature of ruthless predictability had become unpredictable. He was quieter in meetings, more thoughtful. He vetoed a plan to tear down a block of low-income housing to build luxury condos. The very block where, he had discovered from his talks with Sarah, the Carters lived. He told his stunned development team to draft a new plan for renovating the existing buildings instead. This new, softer Alistair was a source of great concern for his second-in-command, a sharp, ambitious executive named Marcus Thorne. Marcus had modeled his entire career on the old Alistair. He was cold, calculating, and believed sentiment was a cancer in the boardroom. He saw Alastair's transformation not as a personal awakening, but as a dangerous weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited. Marcus began to watch him, to dig. He noted the strange, off-the-books payments, the daily chauffeured trips to a working-class neighborhood. It didn't take him long to uncover the story of Lily and Sarah Carter. To Marcus, it was all so clear. The tycoon had gone soft, distracted by a pretty, sick woman and her precocious child. Blackwood Industries was adrift, its iron-willed captain suddenly more interested in planting flowers than in corporate conquest. It was an opportunity, a golden opportunity to seize the helm. The sunflowers in Sophie's patch were now 3 feet tall, their thick stalks reaching for the sun. The garden was a riot of color and fragrance, a vibrant oasis in the concrete jungle. It was a place of healing, a testament to a little girl's stubborn hope. But a storm was gathering on the horizon, a storm that threatened to destroy not only the garden, but the fragile new world Alastair was just beginning to build. Marcus Thorne made his move with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a shark. He didn't stage a dramatic boardroom coup. That was too crude, too noisy. Instead, he worked in the shadows, leveraging the unease that Alastair's recent, erratic behavior had sown among the board members and key investors. He framed Alastair's decision to renovate the Willow Creek apartment building, not as an act of corporate responsibility, but as a foolish, sentimental gesture that would cost the company millions in potential profits. He subtly leaked details of Alastair's unusual relationship with Sarah and Lily Carter to a notoriously ravenous business gossip columnist, painting a picture of a brilliant but aging titan losing his edge, being manipulated by a down-on-her-luck single mother. The narrative was poisonous and effective. Alastair found himself fighting a war on 2 fronts. In the boardroom, he was faced with skeptical questions and veiled accusations. The trust he had commanded for decades was eroding, replaced by suspicion. His every decision was scrutinized, his authority questioned. On the outside, the media storm was relentless. Paparazzi began lurking outside his building, hoping for a shot of the mystery woman and her child. The story was a classic tabloid narrative, the reclusive billionaire and his secret family. It was a gross, twisted caricature of the quiet, healing relationship he had been building. His first instinct was to fight back with his old weapons: lawsuits, threats, financial intimidation. The old Alastair, the wolf of Wall Street, snarled in his cage, ready to be unleashed. He could crush Marcus. He could ruin the journalist. He could silence them all. But as he sat in his office, plotting his counterattack, he looked out the window at the city and saw not a kingdom to be conquered, but a place where people lived, where children played in parks, where mothers struggled to pay for medicine. He thought of Lily, of her innocent, trusting face. He thought of Sarah, of her quiet dignity in the face of so much hardship. Unleashing the wolf would mean dragging them further into the mud, exposing them to even more public scrutiny. It would mean becoming the man he no longer wanted to be. He was paralyzed. For the first time in his professional life, Alastair Blackwood didn't know what to do. The pressure mounted. A major international deal, one Alastair had been working on for years, was suddenly in jeopardy. The foreign partners were getting nervous, spooked by the rumors of instability at the top of Blackwood Industries. Marcus used this to his advantage, arguing to the board that Alastair's personal distractions were now a direct threat to the company's future. He called for an emergency meeting to discuss a leadership transition. It was a thinly veiled attempt to force Alastair out. The night before the meeting, Alastair was in the rooftop garden. The sunflowers were now taller than he was, their heavy heads, thick with seeds, bowing slightly. The air was fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. It was his sanctuary, the one place he felt at peace. But tonight, there was no peace. He felt the weight of his empire pressing down on him, threatening to suffocate him. He could lose it all. The company he had built from nothing, the legacy he had thought was so important. And for what? For a garden, for a woman and a child who had wandered into his life by accident. The old doubts, the old cold logic began to creep back in. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe he had gone soft. Sarah found him there, staring blankly at the glittering city lights. She had let herself in with the spare key he had given her. She carried 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him without a word and stood beside him, following his gaze. "It's beautiful from up here," she said quietly. "It looks so peaceful. It's easy to forget how hard it can be down there." "They're trying to take it all away from me," he said, his voice flat. "The company. Everything I've built." "Is the company everything?" she asked gently. He turned to look at her. In the soft glow of the garden lights, she looked beautiful, her face filled with a calm strength that he found himself envying. "It's what I have," he said. "It's what I made of myself after." After. "You built it to protect yourself," she said, her perception so sharp it was almost painful. "You thought if you built walls high enough, nothing could hurt you again. But that's not how it works, Alistair. The walls don't just keep the pain out, they keep the joy out, too." She gestured to the vibrant garden around them. "Lily didn't just bring this place back to life. She brought you back to life. Don't let them take that from you. The company. It's just a thing. This," she swept her hand around again, "this is real." He looked at the sunflowers, at the small, heart-shaped stone at their base. He thought of Sophie, of her laughter echoing in this very spot. He had built the company in her memory, but it was a cold, hard monument. This garden, vibrant and alive, felt like a much truer tribute. He realized that Sarah was right. He had been fighting the wrong battle. He wasn't fighting for his company. He was fighting for his soul. A new sense of clarity, of purpose settled over him. He knew what he had to do. It was a wild, audacious gamble, something the old Alistair, the cautious calculator of risks, would never have considered. But the new Alistair, the man who planted sunflowers and believed in second chances, was ready to bet it all. The next day, the boardroom at Blackwood Industries was electric with tension. The board members were assembled, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table, opposite Alistair's empty chair, looking for all the world like a man who was already measuring the drapes. He had the votes. He was sure of it. Alistair was finished. The door opened. Alistair walked in, but he was not alone. Beside him, holding his hand, was Lily. And walking just behind them was Sarah. A collective gasp went through the room. The board members stared, stunned into silence. Marcus's smug expression faltered, replaced by disbelief and then fury. "Alistair, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "This is a closed board meeting." Alistair ignored him. He walked to his customary place at the head of the table and lifted Lily so she could sit in his enormous leather chair. He and Sarah stood behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alistair began, his voice calm and steady, resonating with a power they hadn't heard in months. "You are here today because you are concerned about the future of this company. You are concerned that my leadership has become compromised, that I have allowed sentiment to cloud my judgment. You are, in short, concerned that I have gone soft." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their faces, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Well, I am here to tell you that you are absolutely right." Another wave of shock rippled through the room. Marcus leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. This was better than he could have hoped. A public confession. "I have gone soft," Alistair continued. I have spent the last decade building this company on the principle of ruthless, unemotional efficiency. I have built it into a global powerhouse. I have also built it into a company that would evict a sick woman and her child from their home without a second thought. I have built it into a company that values profit over people, and I have come to realize that this is not a strength. It is a profound moral weakness. He placed his hands on Lily's small shoulders. This is Lily Carter. A few months ago, she walked into this building and asked me for a job. Because her mother was sick and they were about to be homeless, I turned her away. It was the logical, efficient thing to do. It was also the most shameful moment of my life. He then looked at Sarah, and the look that passed between them was one of deep, mutual respect. This is her mother, Sarah. She has battled a chronic illness with a courage and grace I have rarely witnessed, and together they have taught me a lesson. I was too arrogant to learn that a life and a business without compassion is a hollow thing indeed. He turned his attention back to the board. Marcus Thorne believes the path to future success lies in the old way, in being harder, colder, more ruthless. He believes my decision to invest in our communities, starting with the Willow Creek renovation, is a waste of resources. I believe it is the only way forward. I believe a company that takes care of its people, not just its executives, but the people who live in the buildings we own and work in the cities we help build, is a stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more profitable company in the long run. He let that sink in. So you have a choice to make today, he said, his voice dropping. You can choose the path of Marcus Thorne, the path of short-term gains and long-term moral bankruptcy. Or you can choose my path, a new path for Blackwood Industries, one built not just on profit, but on purpose. He looked down at Lily. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. I am staking my entire position as CEO, and my majority share in this company, on this choice, he declared. If you vote to replace me, I will walk away. But if you vote to support me, you are not just voting for a CEO. You are voting for a new vision. You are voting for a future where we build more than just skyscrapers. We build hope. He fell silent. The boardroom was utterly still. You could have heard a pin drop. The board members looked at each other, then at Marcus, whose face was pale with rage, and then at Alistair, standing tall and resolute, with a little girl in his chair and a quiet, dignified woman by his side. It was a scene no one in that room would ever forget. The vote was a landslide. Alistair had won. He had bet everything not on a business plan, but on a principle, on a belief in the better angels of human nature. And he had been right. Marcus Thorne resigned before the meeting was even officially adjourned, his ambitions in ruins. As the board members filed out, many of them stopping to shake Alistair's hand with a newfound respect in their eyes, Alistair knelt in front of Lily. The great, powerful CEO knelt before his tiny, 8-year-old employer. Well, Miss Carter, he said, his voice thick with emotion, it seems your employee of the month has managed to keep his job. Lily giggled and threw her arms around his neck, a gesture of pure, uninhibited affection that shattered the last remaining fragments of ice around his heart. You did good, Mr. B, she whispered in his ear. You did real good. Over her shoulder he met Sarah's eyes. They were shining with tears, and with a warmth that promised a future he had never dared to dream of. He stood up, still holding Lily's hand, and reached out his other hand to Sarah. She took it without hesitation. The three of them stood there for a moment in the center of that soulless boardroom, a strange, unlikely, and utterly perfect little family. Outside, the sun was shining. From the rooftop garden, 40 stories above, the sunflowers stood tall and proud, their bright yellow faces turned toward the light, a vibrant, living promise that even after the longest, darkest winter, spring will always, eventually, come again. The garden became their place. On weekends, the three of them would spend hours there, not just working, but talking, laughing, and simply being together. Sarah, with her artistic eye, helped Alistair choose new plants and furniture, transforming it from a mere garden into a true outdoor living space. Lily established a small research station where she would press flowers and study the ladybugs she had insisted they introduce. Alistair found a peace there that had eluded him his entire life. He learned the names of flowers. He learned to distinguish a weed from a seedling. He learned that the simple act of watching something grow could be more satisfying than watching a stock price soar. The changes at Blackwood Industries were profound. The Willow Creek renovation became a model project, lauded in the press as a new standard for corporate responsibility. Alistair established a charitable foundation, run by Sarah, dedicated to supporting families dealing with chronic illness. He instituted new employee wellness programs and profit-sharing initiatives. The company's stock price, after an initial dip, began to climb steadily higher than ever before. It turned out that purpose was, indeed, profitable. Alistair, Sarah, and Lily became a family in all the ways that mattered. He became a fixture at her school plays and parent-teacher conferences. She and her mother filled his sterile penthouse with warmth, clutter, and laughter. He learned about movie nights and blanket forts and the singular joy of a perfectly made peanut butter and jelly sandwich. One crisp autumn evening, they were all in the garden, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the stars come out. Lily was nestled between them, sleepy and content. "Look," she whispered, pointing a small finger at the twinkling sky. "That one there, the really bright one. I think that's Sophie." Alistair looked up at the star, his heart full. He no longer felt the sharp, stabbing pain of grief when he thought of his first family. Now it was a gentle, bittersweet ache, a quiet gratitude for the love he had once had, a love that had, in its own mysterious way, led him here. He squeezed Sarah's hand and pulled Lily a little closer. He was no longer a tycoon, a recluse, a ghost. He was just a man, sitting in a garden, surrounded by the people he loved, under a sky full of stars and infinite possibility. He had been given a second chance at life, a second chance at love, a second chance to see with his heart. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would not waste a single moment of it.